The Edmonton Oilers head into the season with the same shaky goalie room. No upgrades, no reinforcements on the way. And while the team is saying all the right things, we know this is a fragile situation, 1 week goal away from becoming a full-blown disaster.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This upcoming October will be my 10th season doing digital hockey content, my 4th with the Locked On Podcast Network, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com or the App Store and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. On today's show, we are going to continue our series, the 5 biggest storylines facing the Edmonton Oilers this upcoming season. On Monday, we talked about the team's offensive questions. Yesterday, we addressed why the defense is going to need to step up. And on today's show, I have a very simple question, and it will be the ethos. Can you make the untenable tenable? We will start opening our show by talking about goaltending at large, why it is so fickle, why it is difficult to project. Then we will pivot to why the Oilers continue to give Stuart Skinner the benefit of the doubt. And then in our final segment, we will talk about how hard it is to put toothpaste back in the tube in professional sports. So to start out, and if you're an everydayer, if you've been on the train for most of the summer, this has been the driving conversation. And we have discussed the merits of every goalie imaginable. Last week, we did an episode ranking the possibility of goalies ranging from Jeremy Swayman all the way to guys who aren't on rosters right now, like Alexander Georgiev. We have exhausted this conversation, but it is still worth having because the Oilers have failed to address this position. The Edmonton Oilers made the Stanley Cup final last year with the worst goalie tandem statistics of any goalie tandem of the modern era. We'll say salary cap, so 2005 on. Unserious goaltending situation. And the real kick in the butt, if you will, the real pain in the butt about this, the Oilers do not ask a lot of their goaltenders. Last year, in 50 some odd starts that Stuart Skinner had, he faced on average 26 shots on goal per game. That's not 5-on-5. All situations, shorthanded, even strength, power play, all situations. The Oilers are asking Stuart Skinner make 24 out of 26 saves, and most nights that's going to be enough to win. That alone makes the premise of, well, we don't know how a different goalie would handle this situation. That's what pokes a hole in it. That's what makes this illogical, and that's what makes this untenable. Yes, you have no way of knowing how John Gibson or Alexander Georgiev or Alex Lyon or Laurent Brossoit or Jonathan Quick or whatever backup goalie or fringe goalie or prospect, Devin Levy, if you're thinking of a prospect goalie, whoever you might happen to be thinking of to fill in that void, the Oilers are telling you, not so subtly, we don't trust those guys to adapt well to our situation. And it's not a secret that goalie adaptation is tricky. It's kind of like getting a fish into an already existing aquarium, where if you add a new fish to an existing group at home, it's going to take a little while for things to settle. If you already have a dog and you get a second dog, that's kind of the vibe when you drop a new goalie into a team in season. And sometimes you have to, if you're in a situation like the Avalanche were last year, where you were not in a playoff spot, feature on a team that featured 2 of the 5-6 best players in the world, and Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, you had to do something. And I give the Avalanche a lot of credit for remaking their goalie room on the fly last year, targeting Mackenzie Blackwood, finding a way to make an untenable situation better. And I'm not here to say there's an equivalent of that for the Oilers. I think, and we'll talk about this more in our second segment, where we're talking about why the Oilers continue to ride with him. I think fundamentally, the goalie market scares people. I think if you are a general manager and you can get to the Stanley Cup final with this guy, not win, but you can at least get there, your conservative instincts take over and you kind of get into survival mode. And look, the Oilers had a lot of fish to fry this offseason. They had to handle a Bouchard extension. They had to handle a McDavid extension. They needed to do salary cap surgery. They needed to get rid of Evander Kane and Victor Arvidsson. They needed to target upside candidates to replace that production, guys like Andrew Mangiapane, guys like Ike Howard, David Tomasek. The Oilers have tried very actively to do the best they can. And we've discussed it a lot. Is the difference between John Gibson at $6.4 million and Stuart Skinner, who's almost at $3 million, is that difference, that's $3.5–4 million, is that worth having Adam Henrique be your third or fourth line center? Would you rather have an upside, a better third or fourth line center than replacement level? Or would you rather have a goalie who, yes, John Gibson has pretty solid numbers. He's been in a bad environment for a long time. He has a hard time staying healthy. But when he is healthy, he is an effective goalie. And the Oilers said, we know Stuart Skinner is going to be able to give us 45, 50 starts and stay healthy. We know that when we perform to the best of our ability in front of him, he can put together a good season. And I say this a lot, and it's tricky. Because in the world of professional sports, sometimes it benefits to take the long view. Sometimes it benefits to think about what you're doing now and how it impacts what you do. 2.5, 3 years ago, in the midst of that Stuart Skinner rookie season where he made the All-Star team, where he had 40 wins, when you get that level of fortuitousness, where Skinner comes objectively out of nowhere, he was not expected to be a starter that season, and he effectively, by virtue of emergency, got the job from Jack Campbell, played well enough that the Oilers looked at the situation and said, okay, that's our guy. And they gave Jack Campbell a chance to put it back together. He wasn't able to do that. And they said, okay, we can't play this guy at the NHL level anymore. We got to figure something out. And look, I really don't want to rag on Calvin Pickard because I don't think it's fair. He's a journeyman backup. He's bounced around. He went to Europe. He came back. He's been in the AHL. He's been in the NHL. He hasn't really ever been a starter on a good team. He's only ever been a backup on decent teams. And then he was a bell cow starter on a really bad Avalanche team. But this goalie room is being put in a position where they're not being asked to do a lot. And the trick here, and the key for me in understanding this position, is that once you get past the first 7 or 8 guys, you're starting to get into a game of interchangeability. The difference between Darcy Kemper and Logan Thompson, the variance is a little bit bigger. And that's really the key here. When you have your Shesterkin, Sorokin, Vasilevsky, Bobrovsky, Swayman, Ottinger, your range of outcomes is a lot smaller. You know what you're going to get to some degree. When you are paying for a goalie, one of the implied values there is consistency. You know your range of outcomes is going to be relatively defined. The more inexpensive, unless we're talking about an entry-level contract, and even then, still, the more inexpensive a goalie is, the wider the potential range of outcomes. As we've discussed, Stuart Skinner has been unplayably bad in the Stanley Cup playoffs at points. He has also outplayed Jake Ottinger in 2 consecutive Western Conference finals. That makes it challenging because if you're Stan Bowman, you're saying to ourselves, well, we need to score enough goals. We have a good defense. We need to score more goals. I think we can play well enough in front of Stuart Skinner. He doesn't need to do a whole lot. And that becomes the question. What do you value? The best case scenario or what's happened most often? And that's really one of the defining traits of any general manager. Are you accounting for your entire range of outcomes, or are you only looking glass half full? If you're doing the rose-tinted glasses, if you're only looking at a glass half full, you're doing your team a disservice. And look, Stan Bowman can't come out and say, I have no confidence in the goalie, but I couldn't afford to upgrade the position. That's just not something that would be to the benefit of him or the team. But we know that's the case. We know that if the Oilers had more cap flexibility, they would have been in on a goalie. And look, I know there's a bit of conjecture. Maybe Mikey DiPietro, the Bruins try and sneak him through waivers to the A. Maybe they look at an Ilya Samsonov or an Alexander Georgiev, someone who's not currently with the team. Okay. You're not making any of those guys the starter over Skinner. If you want to say those guys would be the backup over Pickard, sure, I'll give you that. But is the difference in those 30 games, that 25 to 30 games that Pickard would start, that would be replaced by one of the 3 guys I just mentioned, is that all of that important when we're talking about it in the context of a Stanley Cup final? But We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, I'm going to tell you why Stan Bowman is giving Stuart Skinner the benefit of the doubt. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off your organizing finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does all of the heavy lifting. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visualizations, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Something Monarch Money has made me aware of is the fact that I wasn't doing a good enough job with my long-term financial stuff, whether that was putting money aside for big purchases, putting money aside for my rainy day fund, putting money aside for my retirement. So Monarch has made it all so easy by putting it all in one place. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year subscription. One more time, that's 50% off your first year subscription at monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers in our return to 5 episodes per week. I'm so glad, so thankful to everyone who's gotten on board. We've tripled the subscriber count in the year and a half, year and 3/4 I've been the host of the show, and it's been a really fun journey immersing myself in the Oilers and really getting an innate understanding of another team. And real quick, if you're new, if you're not an everydayer, the way we here at Locked On Oilers approach hockey is an academic perspective. We talk about hockey as if it's history, if it's anthropology, and we explore it through that lens. And we try and understand motivations, we try and understand decision-making, and we have to account for the fact that some things are not black and white. Some things very much are murky. They are in the shadows. They are gray. This goalie situation is coming to a head. Now, that may not happen in October. That may not happen in November. But no matter what, next summer, when Stuart Skinner is an unrestricted free agent, the Oilers are going to have rubber hit the road. They will need to either commit to Stuart Skinner, even if it's only for one more year. They will need to remodel this goalie room. And everybody can keep wish casting. Look, there's a part of me that would love to find a way to go get Jeremy Swayman, to go get UC Saros, to go get a good goalie from the bad team and give McDavid, Draisaitl, Bouchard a real shot in the arm and tell those guys, thank you so much for everything you do. We want to go all the way. And the Oilers can't do that. On multiple levels, we talked about this last week. They don't have the cap space to absorb a Saros, to absorb a Jeremy Swayman. They don't have the assets to go and acquire one of those guys. And the other part of this, and the awkward part of this, is we know the Oilers can't make more cap space because reportedly they asked Arnell Nurse, they asked Adam Henrique. Both those guys said no. So without the ability to create more cap space, they were boxed in. They had to make a decision based on what they could do. And they were able to trade Arvidsson. They were able to trade Evander Kane. They were able to fill out the lineup. And look, that's not to say there isn't more surgery to be done here. I know I've read a bit of conjecture that they could perhaps get rid of Matthias Janmark, trade him, and save another $500,000-600,000 against the salary cap. And the value of accruing cap space in season isn't as clear going forward because of the fact that there's going to be a salary cap for playoff rosters. So accruing cap space on off days, paper transactions, things of that nature just aren't going to be in general manager toolboxes anymore because it doesn't really have material benefit in terms of adding players at the deadline and improving the roster going into the postseason without subtracting salary out. So I'm not so sure about the Janmark situation, especially knowing that KRIS Knoblaugch likes his veterans, knowing that Zach Hyman is going to miss at least the first few weeks of the regular season, and KRIS Knoblaugch is going to lean on his guys. But speaking of veterans, speaking of benefit of the doubt, and there's really no other way to say it, the Oilers are hoping for the best case scenario here. They think if we only give up 25, 26 shots on goal per night, that's enough where even an average goalie, and to be clear here, the Oilers are not asking Stuart Skinner to do anything impossible. They're not putting him in a situation like the Rangers put Shesterkin last year, like the Flames put Dustin Wolf in, like the Bruins put Swayman in. The Oilers are simply asking Stuart Skinner, do not lose us this game. 26 shots on goal per game is 2 fewer than the NHL average. The average NHL team last year in all situations gave up 28 shots on goal per game. So already we're saying 2 fewer shots on goal per game, lower than average. Okay. How do the Oilers do in things like expected goals and high danger chances against? They're top 10 in both. So that is telling you that this is a goalie issue. It would be one thing if the underlying numbers were bad. You know, if they were 20th in expected goals against, 20th in high danger chances against, and Skinner was playing poorly. Okay. I'd be more willing to understand and say, well, he's not being dealt a great hand. He's not this caliber of player. As my everydayers heard throughout the entirety of the last 2 Stanley Cup playoff runs, the Oilers are simply asking Stuart Skinner to be a guy. When the Oilers get into these 2-1, 3-2 rock fights where it's a staring contest between goalies, that's where Stuart Skinner is going to falter. And again, I have been pretty clear. I don't think Skinner was the difference between winning and losing the Stanley Cup final each of the last 2 years, but I do think there's an argument to be made that those guys, if the Oilers had a slightly better goalie, if they had a goalie with a 905, 910 save percentage, that would put those guys in a different conversation. And I remember recording the short for after the game. The Oilers lost 2-1. It was a Saturday night. I was in the city. I watched the game at a bar, and I was standing on the sidewalk. I was like a block and a half away from Washington Square Park. And I said, Stuart Skinner is not the reason the Oilers lost tonight. But if they had a better goalie, if they had a Bobrovsky, that's the difference that time of year. You just keep the game going. You outlast your opponent. You wear them down. You wean them out. And it's a real conundrum to be in because Skinner has shown the Oilers enough that they don't want to move on. They don't want to give up on him because they think they can constantly push the right buttons. They think they have the capacity to put Skinner in a position to succeed. They think that KRIS Knoblaugch is going to continue finding a way to put him in an advantageous position. And look, KRIS Knoblaugch is a good coach. I have no qualms about saying that. I don't think that's an exaggeration. I don't think that's a hyperbole. I think there's a real argument to be made that the Oilers are in as difficult a position as they could possibly be in when it comes to the goalie room because they do not have the guys. It is one thing to say, well, maybe they're unproven, maybe they're a challenge. No, the Oilers simply do not have the guys. And fact check, while I was talking, the game was close. It was 2-1 at one point. The Oilers ultimately lost game number 5, 5-2. It was, I'm looking at the box score, 2-1, 3-1. Yeah, it was 3-1 at one point. And in my mind, I remember that game being a game where a great goalie would have kept the Oilers in it a little bit longer, and maybe Florida doesn't break them down as quickly. So the Oilers have reached a tipping point. The Oilers have reached a point where they are trying to convince us all this is going to be okay. They are trying to convince us we know how good Stuart Skinner can be. We can put him in that position. The challenge is finding a way to coax that out of him consistently. And there's no discernible track record here of consistency. Yeah, he can play a good game, but there's not a given like, okay, if he hits certain benchmarks, that's what it looks like. There is not a lot Stuart Skinner is going to be able to do to inspire confidence. And for some people, they're done. There are quite a few Oiler fans I know on social who are just outright done with this goalie tandem and think it's outright negligence. Stan Bowman hasn't improved the position group, and I don't blame them. Now, I, as a bit more of an understander, a bit more of a logistics guy, can understand the Oilers had a binary choice this summer. Did they want to try and offset some of the forwards they lost, or did they want to upgrade the goalie? And they felt that based on the fact they were able to get to the Stanley Cup final 2 years in a row with this tandem, that finding a way to try and offset some of the offense they lost in free agency and via trade is going to be more important. They have a better chance of finding success trying to replicate their previous formula than they do changing the goalie, losing that goal scoring depth, and not having a way to replace that depth. It's not necessarily the gamble I would make, but I can understand what they're trying to do. We are going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we'll talk about why it's as simple as one bad game maybe derailing an entire season. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for every game with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel makes it so easy to get in on the action, whether it's before kickoff, whether it's after the game starts with live betting, or if you want to put together a same game parlay with your friends for a squad ride. FanDuel is the best way to add some excitement to your football Sunday. This upcoming week, Browns Ravens in the AFC North, NFC North big game, Bears Lions. Both teams trying to not fall to 0-2. Lions 5.5-point home favorites. Something to keep an eye on. So, FanDuel has one question. Are you ready? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are talking about the biggest storylines facing the Oilers as they enter the upcoming season. And while goalie might be the biggest subject on people's minds, I have structured this week's series of shows around the order of priority for me. I think if the Oilers offense can be close to what it was last year, the power play needs to be better. 5-on-5, it's okay if they're close to even. The power play needs to be better. Power play needs to be top 10 again. They were 11th last year. They'd been top 10 pretty consistently for much of the last 4 years. They need a little bit of juice there to offset some of the difficulties they've had scoring. I put the defense second because I think the defense is the strong point of this team. I think McDavid Draisaitl is undoubtedly the best 1-2 in the NHL, but the defense being 3-4 deep. And look, I know Darnell Nurse is very expensive. I know he is extremely volatile, and I know he is headache inducing. But if you frame it in your mind as, okay, it's Evan Bouchard, it's Ekholm, it's Jake Wallman, it's Brett Kulak, and then it's one of Ty Emberson or Troy Stetcher in addition to Darnell Nurse. Okay. All Nurse has to do is not lose them the game. And look, some of that's going to be awkward. Some of that is going to be KRIS Knoblaugch managing the situation. It's going to be him putting Nurse in position to be more successful. And that's really what it comes down to for me as far as talking about STUART SKINNER. Stan Bowman thinks KRIS Knoblaugch has the capacity to push the right buttons. We've had it happen 2 straight years now. We're in the postseason. Skinner has struggled. He's been benched in favor of Calvin Pickard. Pickard has played 2 or 3 games, and then they've gone back to Skinner, and Skinner has bounced back reasonably well. I do think it's a little bit different now because the stakes are a little bit higher. I think everybody realizes the last 2 seasons were probably the Oilers' best chance with this specific permutation of a supporting cast. I don't think McDavid's going anywhere. Bouchard isn't. Draisaitl isn't. Ekholm after this year. Wallman after this year. Hyman they've got for a few more. Wallman, free agent after this year. The Oilers are going to need to reassess where they're at after this year. The goalie room's going to need a makeover. Ekholm and Wallman are both free agents. Nuge is another year older. Adam Henrique is an unrestricted free agent. With the underlying understanding that last year was probably the best chance they were going to have for a couple, coming into this year, there's going to be significantly more responsibility on the guys who are here to try and offset some of the gaps in other places. We've been very adamant all summer that the Oilers are going to be, at least on paper, not as good of a goal-scoring team. there's an argument to be made that as they've become a bit more of a possession team, a bit more of a cycle team to help offset some of their defensive issues, they've defanged their offense to some degree. They're not creating as much off of the rush. They are becoming more reliant off the cycle. And as we know, the cycle is inherently less efficient. Granted, the cycle is probably easier to get to, but transition play is where you're going to create your dangerous offense. That's where your high danger looks are going to come. That's where your cross team passes are going to come, your 2-on-1s, your 3-on-2s. Those are your best bets to creating quality offense consistently. Now, knowing you don't necessarily have the supporting cast for that, especially on the wings for McDavid and Draisaitl, where foot speed is definitely going to be an issue this upcoming season. As much as I like some of the guys who are still here, they've lost quite a bit of foot speed. Guys like Dylan Holloway, guys like Warren Fogle and Connor Brown. And look, Janmark is still very fast in a straight line, but once he enters the zone with the puck on his stick, he kind of forgets what to do with it. So with less foot speed, you kind of have to become more of a cycle team. Becoming more of a cycle team means more point shots. It means more blue line plays. And subtly, it means your defensemen are going to be on islands more. It means that the puck's going to be up at the line quite a bit. And if Evan Bouchard flubs one, if Ekholm, if any of the guys flub one, or if they pinch too aggressively, it means more responsibility for Stuart Skinner or Calvin Pickard, whoever is in net that given night. You know, it's not a coincidence that the on-ice save percentage for the McDavid minutes last year took a bit of a dip because they were trying to create more offense. They were taking more chances in the offensive zone, and it put Bouchard and Ekholm on islands up at the points, and it put them in positions where they were more liable to break down, to be susceptible to 2-on-1s or 3-on-2s. And in the long run, if you are consistently giving up those explosive chances, they have a better chance of going in. Yes, you expect your goalie to make as many saves as they possibly can, but we do need to be realistic here about what we ask of Stuart Skinner and of Calvin Pickard. These are fringe NHL goalies at this point. I think Stuart Skinner is one of the 64 best goalies in the world. I'm not sure about Calvin Pickard. I think Stuart Skinner is probably closer to 64 than he is number one. I think he is probably somewhere in the 30s or 40s. I would like to say I have confidence in him putting it back together, but for how long? And that's really what's so agonizing about this. All it takes is one stinky game, and this is all the conversation's going to be. When do they go to Pickard? Do they bring a goalie in off the street? Do they try and claim one off of waivers? Do they try and trade for a minor league goalie? All of that is going to happen the first time he has a bad game, and there will be bad games. I expect Stuart Skinner to largely be what he's been. He'll be between 895 and 905. If he has a good season, he'll be closer to 905. If he has a bad one, he'll be closer to 895. I think the goal saved above expected will tell a lot of the story. I think if he is in the mid-teens for the whole season, that's a passable season. That's a 20th best goalie in the NHL. And that's all the Oilers are asking. Stuart Skinner does not need to be the best, top 5, top 10, not even top 15. If Stuart Skinner can be the 20th best goalie in the world, they think they have the team in front of him to win the Stanley Cup. Now, I think Stuart Skinner is probably a little bit lower than that, even at his best. I think the cutting point has been Adin Hill. It's been Jordan Binnington. Darcy Kemper, after going through the numbers and doing last week's Locked On NHL, I feel I was a little disrespectful too, lumping him in with Adin Hill and Jordan Binnington. But Darcy Kemper's been a pretty good goalie over the last 5 to 10 years once he's become a full-time starter. So we can exclude him from that narrative. But the Oilers aren't asking a lot. And KRIS Knoblaugch is going to keep trying to reassemble him every time he has a meltdown. But you can only do this so many times. I am not convinced this goalie room is good enough. I am not convinced the Oilers think this goalie room is good enough. I just think they prioritized the other position groups because they felt there was more opportunity there to squeeze more value maybe out of some bargain bin or some upside plays, whereas the goalie market was effectively going to the roulette wheel. That'll do it for this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments. Do you think there's any chance Skinner bounces back and has a good season? I really don't think we're getting anything more than maybe a league average season, and that's at best. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night, wherever you get your podcasts. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.